Have you ever felt an invisible pressure crushing you? Not something you can point to and say, it is right here. Not something visible, touchable, or easily explainable to another person, but it is there, pressing constantly on your chest, your shoulders, your mind, your very sense of self. You wake up already exhausted before the day begins, because that pressure never lets you rest, not even in sleep. You lie in the dark, trying to name it, trying to locate the source, but it slips away the moment you reach for it, like trying to hold water in your fist. And the next morning, you drag yourself out of bed and face the world again wearing the expression of someone who is fine, someone who has it together, someone who does not feel like they are being slowly flattened by a force they cannot see. But you know something the people around you do not know. You know that the weight is absolutely real. And maybe you have tried to explain it. Maybe you sat across from someone you trust, someone who loves you, and you opened your mouth to describe what you are carrying. And what came back was something like, but you seem fine. You have a good life. What do you have to be stressed about? And right there in that moment, you understood something devastating. That what cannot be seen is rarely believed. That invisible suffering is the loneliest kind of suffering. Because not only are you are being crushed alone in a room full of people who are looking right at you and seeing nothing. And over time, you start to wonder if maybe they are right. Maybe you are imagining it. Maybe you are weak. Maybe you are making it all up. That doubt becomes its own pressure, layered on top of everything else, and suddenly the weight doubles. There is also the strange companion of that pressure, the void, the emptiness that lives right beside the crushing weight, which seems like a contradiction but is not. You can feel both at once, crushed and hollow, heavy and empty, full of feeling and yet completely numb. You fill your hours with activity, noise, scrolling, talking, moving, because the moment everything goes quiet, that void opens up and it is enormous. It has no edges. You look into it and you cannot see the bottom. So you reach for your phone, you turn on a show, you pour another drink, you make another plan, anything to avoid standing alone in the silence with that hollow thing inside you. And yet, no matter how many distractions you pile into your days, the void remains patient, waiting, because you cannot outrun something that lives inside you. But what if I told you that what you are feeling is not weakness? What if I told you that what you are experiencing is not a malfunction of your mind or your spirit, but a physical and philosophical reality that one of the greatest geniuses in human history dedicated his life to understanding? Blaise Pascal, in 17th century France, looked at the world and asked a question that no one before him had dared to ask with such precision. What are the invisible forces that govern everything? And the answer he found, through experiments that scandalized the scientific community, through equations that rewrote the laws of nature, through a journey that eventually broke him open and rebuilt him from the inside, that answer is more relevant to your life today than almost anything you will read in a self-help book or hear in a therapy session. Because Pascal did not just discover physics, he discovered the architecture of invisible reality. And once you understand what he found, you will never look at your own experience the same way again. Pascal was born in 1623 inches, Clermont-Ferrand, France, into a family of mathematicians and intellectuals. His mother died when he was 3 years old. His father, Etienne, was a brilliant tax commissioner and mathematician who chose to homeschool his son, which turned out to be one of the most consequential educational decisions in history. By the time Pascal was 12, he had independently derived Euclid's 32nd proposition. By 16, he had written a groundbreaking essay on conic sections that made the great René Descartes refuse to believe a teenager had produced it. But the discovery that most changed everything for Pascal, and the one that speaks most directly to your life, happened through a series of physical experiments that challenged the foundational assumptions of his entire world. In the 1640s, most scientists still believed in a principle handed down from Aristotle, that nature abhors a vacuum, that emptiness, true emptiness, was impossible, that the universe would always rush to fill any void. Pascal looked at that belief and decided to test it. He had become fascinated by the work of Evangelista Torricelli, an Italian physicist who had created a barometer using mercury in a glass tube. When the tube was inverted over a basin of mercury, a small space appeared at the top of the tube where nothing seemed to exist. Aristotle's followers insisted this space must be filled with something invisible, some undetectable vapor or ether. Pascal was not satisfied with that answer. Between 1646 and 1648, he conducted a series of increasingly sophisticated experiments to prove that the vacuum was real. And here is the discovery that rewriting everything, it was not the vacuum itself that was the revelation, it was what the vacuum revealed about pressure. Because to prove that nothing existed at the top of the tube, Pascal had to understand the invisible force that was acting on the mercury at the bottom. He had to map the pressure of something that no one could see. He had to measure the weight of air. And right here, I need to pause for a moment, because something important just opened up. Pascal was in the business of making invisible things visible. He was proving that there are forces acting on us constantly, forces of enormous weight and power that we cannot see, cannot touch, cannot directly perceive, and yet are completely real. Does that sound familiar to you? Before we go further, I want to ask you something directly. Do you also feel a pressure that no one else seems to see? Have you ever tried to explain to someone the weight you carry and watch their face go blank because they simply could not locate what you were pointing at? If you have ever felt that, if you are feeling it right now, I want you to know that you are not alone and you are not inventing it. Write in the comments, I feel the invisible pressure. Or if you are ready to stop denying what your body already knows, write, I am ready to see what is really there. Your words matter. Every single person in this community who reads your comment will feel less alone. And that is not a small thing. That is everything. Now let us go deeper, because what Pascal discovered next changes the entire conversation. In September of 1648, Pascal arranged one of the most elegant experiments in the history of science. He sent his brother-in-law, Florent Perrier, to climb the Puy de Dôme, a volcanic mountain in central France, carrying a barometer. At the base of the mountain, they measured the height of the mercury in the tube. At the summit, more than 1,000 meters above, they measured again, and the mercury was lower. Measurably, consistently, undeniably lower. This meant that the pressure of the atmosphere was greater at the bottom than at the top, which meant that there was an actual column of air above every person on Earth, pressing down on them at all times, with a force equivalent to several tons per square meter. The weight of the entire atmosphere was resting on every single person, every single moment, invisible, unfelt, unmeasurable by any human sense. Pascal had not just proven the vacuum, he had proven that the whole world lives under an invisible, crushing weight, and that nobody noticed, because it was all they had ever known. Think about that for a moment. Every person alive is carrying the weight of an entire atmosphere. Every person alive is being pressed upon by a force so enormous that if you removed it suddenly, the body would not survive, and we walk around feeling like we should be lighter. We compare ourselves to people who seem unburdened and wonder what is wrong with us. We feel the weight and interpret it as personal failure instead of physical reality. Pascal understood something crucial. The pressure is not in your head. The pressure is real. The question is not whether it exists, but whether you understand it well enough to navigate it. Because here is what he also discovered. Pressure is not random. Pressure follows laws, and when you understand those laws, you stop being crushed by forces you cannot name, and you start moving through them with intention. Before we go further into what Pascal discovered, I want to speak to you for just a moment about this channel and what we are building here together. If you have found your way to this video, it is probably not by accident. You are someone who asks deep questions. You are someone who refuses to accept surface-level answers to the things that matter most. And I want you to know that there is a home for people like you here. Every week we explore the lives of history's most profound thinkers, not as academic exercises, but as maps for navigating your own existence. If that resonates with you, consider subscribing. Not because you owe me anything, but because you deserve a consistent space where your depth is welcomed instead of avoided. You deserve a community of people who feel what you feel and are willing to name it honestly. There are thousands of people in this community right now who have sat exactly where you are sitting, carrying exactly what you are carrying. Hit the subscribe button and join them. You do not have to carry any of this alone. Pascal's most famous contribution to physics, the one that still carries his name today, is the principle of hydrostatics, now known as Pascal's law. In 1653, he published his Treatise on the Equilibrium of Liquids, and in it he stated something that seems simple but has profound implications. Pressure applied to a confined fluid is transmitted equally in all directions throughout the fluid. If you push on water at one point, that pressure does not stay local, it spreads. It distributes itself evenly through every part of the contained space. This is the principle behind hydraulic systems, behind the brakes in your car, behind the machinery that lifts enormous weights with minimal force, and it is also, when you see it clearly, a description of how suffering works in a human life. When you are under pressure, when something compresses your life at one point, that pressure does not stay contained. It spreads. It shows up in your sleep, in your relationships, in your appetite, in your creativity, in your patience, in your sense of self. The pressure at one point becomes pressure everywhere. Pascal understood this mechanically before anyone had the language for it emotionally. And what his law also tells us is this: you cannot simply push harder on one side and expect the other side to stay unchanged. Every system has a point of equilibrium, and when you disrupt it, the whole system rearranges itself around the new reality. Your life is a system. Your relationships, your inner world, your physical body, your spiritual condition, they are all connected in a fluid way. Push on one, and all of them respond. But here is the part of Pascal's story that almost never gets told. After all of this extraordinary scientific work, after the vacuum experiments, after the mountain barometer proof, after the formulation of hydrostatic law, after building one of the first mechanical calculators in history at age 18, after laying groundwork for probability theory, Pascal walked away from science almost entirely. In November of 1654, he was involved in a carriage accident near the Neuilly Bridge in Paris. The horses plunged over the edge of the bridge, but the carriage, miraculously, stopped at the railing. Pascal was shaken to his core, and sometime in the weeks that followed, on the night of November 23rd, 1654, something happened to him that he could not explain with any of his equations. He described it as 2 hours of fire. He wrote about it afterward in a document so personal, so raw, so unlike anything he had ever written, that he sewed it into the lining of his coat and wore it against his body for the rest of his life. It was found there after his death. In that document, now known as the Memorial, Pascal wrote about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, not the God of philosophers and scholars, but the living God, the God of fire, of presence, of encounter. And in that night, the man who had measured the weight of the atmosphere, who had proven the existence of the vacuum, who had calculated the laws of pressure, came to understand something that his instruments could not measure and his equations could not contain. He had spent his life proving that invisible forces are real. He had built the scientific framework for understanding what cannot be directly seen. And in that night of fire, he encountered the most invisible and most real force of all. The encounter did not contradict his science, it completed it. Because all along, the question underneath his physics was the same question underneath his theology. What are the unseen forces that hold everything together? And what happens to a human being when they finally stop denying those forces and turn to face them? Pascal lived for only 8 more years after that night. He was 31 when it happened and 39 when he died, his body ravaged by illness, his mind still brilliant and still searching. In those years, he wrote what became the Pensies, a collection of fragments and reflections intended to form an apology for the Christian faith. He never finished it. He died before it could be organized and completed. But the fragments that survived are among the most penetrating observations about the human condition ever committed to paper. And in them, you can see how his physics and his theology had merged into a single lens. He wrote that the heart has reasons which reason knows nothing of. He understood, from the inside out, that the most real things in a human life are precisely the ones that cannot be captured by measurement. The pressure of grief, the vacuum of loneliness, the atmospheric weight of a life lived in denial of its own depth. These things are real. They follow laws. And the first law is that you cannot make them disappear by refusing to see them. So here is what I want you to take away from Pascal's story today. The invisible pressure you feel is not a sign of weakness or malfunction. It is a sign that you are alive and that you are sensitive to the actual forces acting on your life. Pascal proved 300 years ago that we all live under enormous invisible pressure, that the vacuum exists, that hidden forces follow laws even when we cannot see them. And he also proved something more personal, that the moment you stop running from the invisible and turn to face it, everything changes. The experiments do not lie. The pressure does not disappear when you name it, but it becomes navigable. You move from being crushed without understanding to carrying a known weight with intention. And that shift from blind pressure to conscious navigation is the beginning of everything. Today, if you are sitting with a pressure that no one else can see, I want you to do what Pascal did, not to run another experiment or climb another mountain, but to stop moving long enough to let the invisible become visible, to sit in the silence that terrifies you and let it speak. The void inside you is not nothing. Pascal spent his career proving that vacuums, which seem like nothingness, are in fact defined spaces with specific properties and profound implications. Your emptiness is not evidence that something is wrong with you. It may be evidence that something enormous is trying to find its way in. The same man who measured the weight of the atmosphere with mercury and glass eventually discovered that the heaviest things are not measurable by any instrument he could build. Reality is not as solid as it looks. The invisible is more real than the visible. And you already knew that. You have been feeling it your whole life. Now you have the language to say it out loud.